In January 1907, a farmer in New Jersey saw something fly out of his barn. It had the head of a horse, and it was screaming. Welcome to local legends. Today, not the kind of silence you get in a city at 3 in the morning, where absence itself hums with potential, but something older, something mineral. The pines rise black against a sky the color of tarnished pewter. Their needles catch snow but hold no wind. The undergrowth, mountain laurel, scrub oak, patches of brown sedge, presses in from both sides of the narrow paths that people in 1907 still called roads, though they were little more than ruts frozen solid in the clay. When you walked those paths at dusk, your boots made sounds that traveled nowhere. The forest swallowed them, and if you stopped, if you stood perfectly still with your lantern guttering and the cold working its way through wool and cotton to find your skin, you would notice something. The woods were listening. That is what the farmer would later tell the authorities, that the silence had weight, that it had been waiting. He had crossed his yard that evening, the 16th of January 1907, to check the barn. The door hung slightly ajar. He hadn't left it that way. Inside, the horses were motionless, heads low, ears pinned flat. The air smelled of rust and ammonia, and something else. Something sour, like rot mixed with the electric tang that comes before a lightning strike. Then he heard it. Not a horse's whinny, not a scream in any human register. Something between the two. High, rasping, furious. And when he raised the lantern, he saw it crouched on the beam above the stalls, its wings folded against a body too long and too lean, its neck curved in a way no natural things should curve, and its head, God help him. Its head was the head of a horse, but wrong. The eyes too far forward, the jaw elongated, the teeth bared in a rictus that might have been rage or hunger or both. It turned. It looked at him, and then it screamed again, spread those wings, leathery, bat-like, spanning perhaps 10 feet, and launched itself toward the open door. The farmer fell backward into the snow. The thing passed over him, low enough that he felt the downdraft, cold and fetid, and then it was gone. A shape against the clouds, rising fast toward the southeast. By the time he could stand, his hands were shaking too badly to hold the lantern. He would not sleep that night. He would not sleep for many nights, because he had seen it. The thing the old Dutch and Swedish families whispered about. The thing that, according to his grandmother, had been born in Leeds Point more than 200 years before. He had seen the Jersey Devil. The Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey, known locally as the Pinelands, comprise roughly 1.1 million acres of coastal plains stretching across 7 counties, from the edge of the Atlantic marshes westward, into the sandy, acidic uplands that separate the urban corridors of Philadelphia and New York. It is not wilderness in the sense of the Rockies or the North Woods. People have lived here for millennia. The Lenape, the original inhabitants, specifically the Unami and Munsee, speaking divisions of the larger Lenape nation, knew these forests as places of seasonal harvest, hunting grounds rich in deer and waterfowl, and routes of travel between the coast and the interior river valleys. They called the land Shaichbi, the land beside the water, and they moved through it with a knowledge that the later European settlers never quite acquired. The Lenape understood the forest as a living system, the cedar swamps where sphagnum moss grew thick and water ran black with tannins, the pitch pine uplands where fires, set intentionally or by lightning, cleared the understory and released seeds from resin, sealed cones, the hidden streams that could turn a straight path into a winding detour of hours. They knew which plants were medicinal and which were poison. They knew the sounds of the night, the scream of a bobcat, the hiss of a barn owl, the grunting of wild boar. And they knew when something was out of place. But the Lenape were not the ones who created the legend of the Jersey Devil, at least not in the form it has come down to us. The devil, as a named and localized entity, is a product of colonial encounter, a hybrid born from the collision of Lenape cosmology, European folklore, Christian demonology, and the particular anxieties of settlers living on the margins of an unfamiliar world. When the Swedes established their first settlements along the Delaware River in the 1630s, and when the Dutch and later the English pushed eastward into the interior pine forests in the decades that followed, they brought with them old world stories of night, flyers, The Notcrap, the Druid, the Mara, shapeshifters and witches who took animal form and tormented livestock and travelers. They brought beliefs in changelings, in diabolic pacts, in creatures that were neither fully beast nor fully spirit, but something contaminated, something cursed. And when those settlers encountered the Pine Barrens, a landscape that resisted easy cultivation, where the soil was too sandy and too acidic for wheat or corn, where the rivers ran rust, colored, and the woods seemed to go on forever without clearing, they layered their old fears onto the new place. The Lenape had their own stories of beings that inhabited the liminal spaces of the forest. There were tales of the Matfentaku fate, a creature of the deep woods that could lead the unwary astray, and of spirits that guarded certain groves and waterways, demanding respect and offering punishment to those who violated taboo. But these were not demons in the Christian sense. They were part of a cosmology in which the land itself was animate, in which every place had its keepers, and in which balance, not conquest, was the operative logic of survival. The European settlers did not share that worldview. To them, the forest was either a resource to be extracted or a threat to be tamed. And when it resisted both, when it remained dark and tangled and full of sounds they could not name, they needed an explanation. They needed a monster. The Jersey Devil, as it is known today, is typically described as a bipedal creature standing between 4 and 6 feet tall when upright, though some accounts stretch that figure to 7 or 8 feet. Its head is most commonly compared to that of a horse or a ram, elongated and lean, with large teeth and eyes that glow red or yellow in lamplight or moonlight. The neck is long serpentine in some tellings, and the body is covered in dark fur or coarse hair, though the texture varies. Some witnesses describe it as matted and filthy, others as sleek, almost seal-like. The legs are thin but powerful, ending in cloven hooves, and the arms, when mentioned at all, are short and clawed. But the defining features, the ones that appear in nearly every account, are the wings and the scream. The wings are leathery, bat-like, spanning anywhere from 10 to 15 feet when fully extended. They produce a sharp, percussive sound when beating, a snap or crack, like canvas pulled taut in a gale, and the scream is described, again and again, as something that pierces, not merely loud but invasive, a sound that seems to bypass the ears and lodge directly in the base of the skull. Some compare it to a woman's scream mixed with the shriek of a wounded horse. Others say it sounds like a steam whistle or a train brake, mechanical and organic at once. Still others insist that it is a language, that the devil is trying to speak, but cannot. That what emerges is rage compressed into noise. There are, however, regional and temporal variations. In the earliest accounts from the 18th and early 19th centuries, the creature is sometimes described as more dog, like a quadruped with wings grafted unnaturally onto its back. These versions emphasize its terrestrial nature. It runs on all fours through the underbrush, only taking flight when pursued or threatened. By the late 19th century, as the legend solidified and spread beyond the Pinelands, the image shifted toward the bipedal form, more upright, more humanoid in posture, though still fundamentally monstrous. This shift may reflect the influence of print media and illustration. Images of the devil began appearing in newspapers and pamphlets, and visual representation tends to standardize. The wings, too, evolved early descriptions. Sometimes mention feathers, as though the creature were some corrupted bird. Later accounts almost universally describe bat wings, a detail that aligns more closely with European depictions of demons and gargoyles. This is not accidental. As the legend moved from oral tradition into mass culture, it absorbed iconography from Christian art, from Gothic literature, from the visual grammar of the monstrous that was already familiar to a 19th century American audience. Some versions include additional abilities. The devil is said to be able to move with impossible speed, covering miles in minutes, appearing in multiple locations on the same night, a trait that made it especially terrifying during the wave of sightings in January 1909 when reports flooded in from towns across South Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania, sometimes separated by distances of 20 or 30 miles within the span of a few hours. It is also frequently described as leaving tracks, three-toed or cloven hoof prints, found in snow or mud, often in places that seem inaccessible, on rooftops, along narrow fence rails, across thin ice that should not have supported any weight. Some accounts claim the creature can disappear at will, fading into shadow or mist, though whether this is literal invisibility or simply the result of its speed and the darkness of the forest is a matter of interpretation. There are also persistent stories that the devil is immune to bullets. Farmers and hunters claim to have fired directly at it, at close range, and seen no effect. The creature merely shrieked and flew away, or turned and charged, undeterred. Whether this reflects misses, poor light, or something genuinely anomalous is impossible to say, but the motif recurs often enough to be considered part of the legend's core. As for weaknesses, the folklore of, unlike werewolves, no silver. The devil is not repelled by Christian symbols, though some early accounts suggest that prayer or the sound of church bells can drive it away temporarily. More common is the belief that the creature avoids fire and bright light, which is why it is almost always encountered at dusk or in the hours before dawn. Some traditions hold that iron can harm it, an echo of older European fairy lore, and there are scattered reports of people hanging iron horseshoes or tools above their doors to keep the devil at bay. But these are precautions, not weapons. The overwhelming sense in nearly all versions of the legend is that the Jersey Devil cannot be killed. It can only be endured. The origin story most closely associated with the Jersey Devil is the tale of Mother Leeds, and it is this narrative, repeated, embellished, and contested, that has come to define the creature's mythic genealogy. According to the most widely circulated version, in the year 1735, a woman known as Mother Leeds, living in the Leeds Point area of what is now Atlantic County, discovered she was pregnant with her 13th child. She was poor, exhausted, and bitter. Her husband, often described as a drunkard or an absentee, provided little support. The existing 12 children demanded more than she could give, and so, in a moment of rage and despair, she cursed the unborn child. The exact wording varies by telling, but the essence is always the same. She declared that the child would be a devil, that she wanted no part of it, that it could belong to hell for all she cared. Some versions have her invoking Satan by name. Others simply have her saying, "Let this one be a devil." When the child was born on a stormy night, it appeared at first to be normal, but within minutes, according to the legend, it began to change. Its body elongated, its face contorted into a snout or muzzle, wings erupted from its back, and its limbs twisted into clawed appendages. It attacked the midwives and the family members present, killed some or all of them depending on the version, and then flew up the chimney or burst through a window, escaping into the night. It has haunted the Pine Barrens ever since, an immortal curse made flesh, neither fully alive nor fully dead, sustained by its own malice and the circumstances of its birth. The Leeds name is historically real. Daniel Leeds was a prominent colonial figure in early New Jersey, a Quaker who later converted to Anglicanism and published a series of almanacs in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. His almanacs included astrological charts and arcane symbols, which drew the ire of more conservative Quaker leaders, who accused him of dabbling in the occult. This conflict may have contributed to the family's association with dark magic and misfortune in local lore. Some historians suggest that the devil legend was, in part, a piece of political slander, a way for Leeds's enemies to attack his reputation by framing his lineage as cursed. Others point to Titan Leeds, Daniel's son, who continued publishing the almanacs and became embroiled in a public feud with Benjamin Franklin in the 1730s. Franklin, writing under the pseudonym Richard Saunders for his own Poor Richard's Almanac, predicted the exact date and hour of Titan Leeds's death as a publicity stunt. When the date passed and Leeds was still alive, Franklin claimed that Leeds must have actually died and that an imposter was writing under his name. The feud became a minor scandal, and it is possible that the association of the Leeds family with death and devilry took root in the popular imagination around this time. However, the specific tale of Mother Leeds and the 13th child does not appear in any verifiable historical record from the 18th century. The earliest known printed reference to something resembling the modern Jersey Devil story comes from the mid-19th century, more than 100 years after the supposed birth in 1735. This does not mean the oral tradition did not exist earlier. Many folktales circulate for generations before being written down, but it does mean we cannot trace a clear documentary line back to a real woman named Mother Leeds, or a real event in 1735. What we can say is that by the 1850s and 1860s, residents of the Pine Barrens were telling stories about a creature born from a curse, a creature that flew and screamed and could not be killed, and that this creature was increasingly being called the Jersey Devil or the Leeds Devil. The logic of the curse itself is worth examining. In European and colonial American folklore, curses spoken by mothers, especially curses uttered during pregnancy or childbirth, carry particular weight. The mother is seen as the conduit of life, and her words, especially in moments of extremity, are believed to have the power to shape that life, or to corrupt it. This belief intersects with Christian notions of original sin, with fears about female agency and anger, and with older pagan ideas about the potency of spoken intention. A mother's curse is not just an expression of frustration, it is a performative act, a conjuring. And in a colonial society, where women had limited power, where childbirth was dangerous and often fatal, and where the economic burden of large families could be crushing, the figure of the desperate, cursing mother becomes a sight of both sympathy and horror. She is victim and perpetrator, human and monstrous. Her child becomes the embodiment of her rage, a creature that exists outside the boundaries of family, society, and nature itself. Some scholars have suggested that the Jersey Devil legend also reflects anxieties about miscarriage, stillbirth, and infant deformity. In an era before modern obstetrics, such tragedies were common, and they were often interpreted through moral or supernatural lenses. A child born with severe physical abnormalities might be seen as evidence of divine punishment or demonic interference. The idea that such a child could survive, could grow into something powerful and vengeful, taps into deep fears about the failure of the family unit and the breakdown of the natural order. The Jersey Devil in this reading is the child who should not have been, the birth that was never supposed to happen, made monstrous by rejection and forced into an existence defined entirely by exile. But there is another layer. The Pine Barrens, throughout the colonial period and into the 19th century, were home to communities that existed on the margins of mainstream society. Some were descendants of Lenape, who had not been displaced westward during the forced removals. Others were escaped slaves, free black families, and mixed race communities who found refuge in the forest's isolation. Still others were poor whites, squatters, charcoal burners, ironworkers, bootleggers, who lived outside the reach of law and church. These communities, collectively and often pejoratively referred to as Pineys, were regarded with suspicion by the surrounding towns. They were stereotyped as inbred, backward, dangerous. And it is possible that the Jersey Devil legend, with its emphasis on a cursed bloodline and a monstrous birth, functioned as a kind of coded narrative about these marginalized people, a way for outsiders to project their anxieties onto the forest and its inhabitants, to transform human poverty and difference into supernatural threat. This is not to say that the devil legend was entirely invented by outsiders. Oral traditions within the Pinelands, communities themselves often include the creature, sometimes as a warning to children, sometimes as an explanation for livestock deaths or mysterious noises, sometimes as a symbol of the forest's own power and resistance to control. But as the legend moved outward, as it was picked up by newspapers and writers and folklorists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was increasingly shaped by external perspectives. By people who saw the Pine Barrens as a place of darkness and degeneracy, the devil became a mascot for backwardness, for the parts of New Jersey that had not yet been paved over or modernized. And in that transformation, something of the original complexity was lost. The first significant outsider engagement with the Jersey Devil legend came not from folklorists but from journalists. In the decades following the Civil War, as New Jersey's cities grew and rail lines expanded, the Pine Barrens became a kind of internal frontier, a place that was geographically close but culturally distant. Newspapers in Philadelphia, Trenton, and Camden began publishing stories about the Leeds Devil or the Jersey Devil, often in a sensational or mocking tone. These stories were typically brief, filler material, the 19th century equivalent of clickbait, and they rarely attempted any serious investigation. The creature was presented as a curiosity, a local superstition, something quaint or absurd. But the tone shifted in January 1909. Between the 16th of January and the 23rd of January of that year, the Delaware Valley was gripped by what can only be described as mass hysteria. Hundreds of people across more than 30 towns in New Jersey and Pennsylvania reported seeing the Jersey Devil. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. A creature with a horse-like head, bat wings, cloven hooves, and a piercing scream. Footprints were found everywhere, on rooftops, in backyards, along canal, towpaths, across freshly fallen snow. Schools closed, factories shut down. Armed posses formed and patrolled the streets at night. The phenomenon was so widespread and so intense that it drew the attention of the Philadelphia Zoo, which sent investigators to collect footprint casts and interview witnesses. The Philadelphia Evening Bulletin, the Camden Courier, the Trenton Times, and dozens of smaller papers ran front-page stories. For 1 week, the Jersey Devil was not folklore, it was news. The 1909 wave has been analyzed extensively. Skeptics point to hoaxes, and there were definitely some. A promoter in Philadelphia briefly exhibited a creature he claimed was the Jersey Devil, which turned out to be a kangaroo painted with stripes and fitted with fake wings. But the hoaxes came after the initial wave of sightings, and they cannot account for the sheer number of independent reports, many from credible witnesses, police officers, postal workers, trolley conductors. Some researchers have suggested mass suggestion, arguing that once the first few stories appeared in the papers, people began interpreting ambiguous sights and sounds through the lens of the legend. An owl becomes a winged demon. A dog's tracks become cloven prints. This is plausible, and it almost certainly explains some percentage of the reports. But it does not explain all of them. It does not explain the consistency of the descriptions, the convergence of details from people who had no contact with one another. And it does not explain why it happened in January 1909 specifically, and not in any other January before or since. One witness, a trolley conductor named Louis Boger, described an encounter on the night of the 21st of January near the town of Haddon Heights. He was walking along the tracks after his shift when he heard a rustling in the trees. He turned and saw, perched on a low branch, a creature roughly the size of a large dog but standing upright. Its eyes reflected his lantern, glowing a dull yellow. It had wings folded against its back, and a head that he described as like a collie, but longer, and with horns or ears sticking up. It watched him for several seconds, then opened its wings and flew directly over him, low enough that he felt the air move. He said the smell was overwhelming, like rotten meat mixed with sulfur. He ran the rest of the way home and did not return to work for 3 days. Bigay was interviewed by multiple newspapers. His account did not change. He was not drunk. He had no history of making wild claims. He simply reported what he saw. Another case involved a farmer named William Cromley in the town of Clayton, Gloucester County, on the morning of the 19th of January. Cromley found his chickens dead, more than 20 of them killed during the night. The bodies were not eaten, just torn apart. The coop door had been ripped off its hinges. In the snow around the coop, he found tracks, 3 toed prints, each about 4 inches long, with a stride that suggested something walking on 2 legs. The tracks led away from the coop, across the field, and then simply stopped, as though whatever had made them had lifted off into the air. Cromley reported the incident to the local constable, who confirmed the tracks and took photographs. Those photographs were published in the Clayton News on the 22nd of January, 1909. They show clear, deep impressions in the snow, with no sign of forgery or tampering. Cromley himself offered a reward, $10, a significant sum at the time, for anyone who could capture or kill the creature responsible. No one collected. Perhaps the most disturbing account from the 1909 wave comes from the town of Woodbury, where a police officer named James Sackville fired his revolver at a shape he saw on the roof of a building on Broad Street, just after midnight on the 20th of January. Sackville was on patrol when he heard a loud thumping sound above him. He looked up and saw a large, dark figure silhouetted against the sky. It had wings, and it was moving along the roofline in a way that struck him as unnatural. Too fast, too deliberate, he shouted for it to stop. It turned and looked at him, and Sackville later told the Woodbury Daily Times that its eyes were like coals. He drew his weapon and fired twice. He was an experienced officer and a good shot. He believed he hit it at least once, because the creature lurched and made a sound he described as a scream and a hiss together, like steam escaping under pressure. But it did not fall. It spread its wings and flew north, disappearing over the rooftops. Sackville found no blood, no body, no sign that his bullets had any effect beyond provoking the scream. He was shaken enough that he requested reassignment to day shifts for the remainder of the month. The 1909 sightings eventually subsided, but they left a mark. The Jersey Devil was no longer just a regional legend. It had become, however briefly, a national story, covered by papers as far away as Chicago and San Francisco. And while most coverage was skeptical or sensational, treating the whole thing as an amusing panic, the fact remained that hundreds of people had seen something, and many of them maintained their accounts for the rest of their lives. The creature had entered the American cultural consciousness in a new way, not as a ghost story told around campfires, but as something that might possibly be real. In the decades that followed, the devil sightings continued, though never again with the intensity of 1909. In the 1930s, reports began to attract the attention of federal authorities. This was the era of the first serious government investigations into unexplained phenomena, driven partly by the advent of aviation and the increasing number of strange aerial sightings, and partly by the broader cultural interest in cryptozoology and the paranormal. In 1934, the Federal Bureau of Investigation received multiple letters from residents of South Jersey, requesting an investigation into the Jersey Devil. The letters described livestock mutilations, nighttime encounters, and persistent footprints. At least one letter claimed that the creature had been seen near a military installation, raising concerns about security. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, known for his meticulous record keeping and his tendency to take even unlikely threats seriously, assigned agents to review the reports. According to a declassified memorandum dated November 1934, the Bureau concluded that while no credible physical evidence of an unidentified creature has been obtained, the reports could not be entirely dismissed, and local law enforcement was advised to remain vigilant for any incidents that might pose a public safety risk. The FBI's involvement did not end in 1934. Throughout the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, scattered reports continued to reach federal files, often bundled with other unexplained incidents, UFO sightings, reports of mysterious lights, encounters with unidentified animals. In a 1957 internal memo, an FBI field agent stationed in Atlantic City wrote that the Jersey Devil had become a persistent low-level concern among rural communities, and that while the Bureau did not regard the creature as a genuine threat, the social impact of the belief was real and occasionally resulted in property damage, public disturbances, and even injuries when residents took matters into their own hands, forming armed search parties or setting traps. The memo recommended that local police continue to monitor the situation, and that the FBI remain prepared to intervene if violence escalated. This is a remarkable document. It shows that, at least within the bureaucratic machinery of mid-century law enforcement, the Jersey Devil was treated not as folklore but as a social phenomenon with measurable consequences. Something that required management even if it could not be explained. There were also military reports. In 1941, shortly after the United States entered World War II, personnel stationed at Fort Dix and the adjacent McGuire Air Force Base, both located in Burlington County, well within the traditional range of devil sightings, reported encounters with an unidentified flying creature. These reports were initially dismissed as misidentifications of aircraft or birds, but the descriptions did not match any known species or technology. One airman, interviewed years later by a researcher from Rutgers University, recalled seeing something land near the edge of the runway late one night in the winter of 1942. He described it as Man-sized, maybe a little bigger, with wings like a bat and a head that looked wrong. He did not file a formal report at the time, fearing ridicule, but he remembered it clearly because the base went on alert for several hours, and there were rumors that something had triggered motion sensors near the perimeter fence. No explanation was ever provided to the enlisted personnel. In 1960, residents of the town of Mays Landing reported a wave of sightings over the course of 2 weeks in October. The local police chief, a man named Howard Campbell, investigated personally and later gave an interview to the Atlantic City Press, in which he stated that while he could not say what people were seeing, he did not believe they were lying or hallucinating. He described finding tracks near the Great Egg Harbor River, tracks that did not match any known animal in the region. He also noted that several dogs in the area had gone missing and that a number of residents were refusing to leave their homes after dark. Campbell requested assistance from the state police, but the request was denied. The official response was that the reports were not credible enough to warrant state resources. But Campbell kept copies of his incident reports, and they remain in the Mays Landing Municipal Archives to this day. They are detailed, sober, and disturbingly specific. The 1966 case in Woodstown is worth particular attention. On the night of the 3rd of March, a family named Silcox reported that something had landed on the roof of their farmhouse. They heard heavy footsteps, then a scraping sound, as though claws were dragging across the shingles. The father, Arthur Silcox, went outside with a flashlight and a shotgun. He saw a shape on the roof, silhouetted against the moon. It was large, roughly the size of a man, and it had wings. He fired once into the air, intending to scare it away. The creature responded by leaping from the roof and gliding toward him. Silcox later told investigators that it passed within 5 feet of his head, close enough that he could see its face, which he described as equine but distorted, with a jaw that hung open and teeth that were too long. It landed in the field beyond the house and then took off again, flying east toward the pine forests. The Silcox family's account was corroborated by neighbors, who reported hearing the gunshot and the scream. State police visited the property the following day and confirmed damage to the roof, scratches and gouges in the shingles, consistent with something large and heavy having perched there. No explanation was offered. The case remains open in the state police files, though it has not been actively investigated since the 1960s. The Jersey Devil entered popular culture in stages, each stage reflecting and reshaping the legend in different ways. The first major literary treatment came in 1927, when author and folklorist Henry Charlton Beck published Jersey Genesis, the story of the Mullica River, a collection of historical sketches and local legends focused on the Pine Barrens. Beck's book included a chapter on the Jersey Devil, drawing heavily on oral traditions collected from residents of the Pinelands. He presented the creature as a regional symbol, a manifestation of the area's resistance to modernity and urbanization. Beck's tone was romantic and nostalgic. He was less interested in whether the devil was real than in what the belief in it said about the people of South Jersey. His version of the Mother Leeds story became the standard template for later retellings, and his descriptions of the creature's appearance influenced how it would be depicted in subsequent decades. But the real explosion of interest came in the 1970s and 1980s, when the Jersey Devil was absorbed into the broader cryptozoology movement. Books like Mysterious America by Loren Coleman, published in 1983, treated the devil as a legitimate subject of scientific inquiry, placing it alongside Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and the Mothman in a taxonomy of unknown creatures. Coleman's work was rigorous by the standards of the field. He conducted interviews, analyzed footprint casts, and mapped sighting locations. He argued that the Jersey Devil might be a surviving population of a prehistoric species, perhaps a pterosaur or some other flying reptile that had persisted in the isolated Pine Barrens long after its supposed extinction. This theory was speculative, and it lacked supporting evidence, but it gave the legend a veneer of scientific legitimacy and attracted a new generation of researchers and enthusiasts. The devil also appeared in fiction, often in ways that flattened or distorted the original legend. In the 1982 horror novel, The Jersey Devil by James F. David, pseudonym, the creature is reimagined as a demonic entity summoned through satanic ritual. a tool of human evil rather than a cursed birth. The book was pulpy, violent, and commercially successful, and it established a template for later horror treatments. The devil as a monster to be fought and defeated, stripped of its regional specificity and its cultural roots. This version had little to do with the Pine Barrens, or the Lenape, or the colonial history of New Jersey. It was a generic demon in a generic haunted forest, interchangeable with any other horror antagonist. Television followed. In 1993, the Jersey Devil appeared in an episode of The X-Files, the influential science fiction series that blended government conspiracy theories with paranormal investigation. In The Jersey Devil, Season 1, Episode 5, FBI agents Mulder and Scully investigate a series of murders in Atlantic City that seem to involve a primitive, humanoid creature living in the forest. The episode presents the devil as a kind of feral human, possibly the descendant of a lost tribe or a person driven to madness and devolution by isolation. It is sympathetic in its portrayal, emphasizing the creature's victimhood and its incompatibility with modern civilization. The episode was well received and introduced the legend to an international audience, but it also shifted the emphasis away from the supernatural and toward the quasi-scientific. The devil became a mystery to be solved, a puzzle with a rational answer, rather than a symbol of something that defies explanation. In 2002, the legend was adapted into a feature film, 13th Child, Legend of the Jersey Devil, directed by Stephen Stockage. The film retained the mother lead's origin story, but added layers of witchcraft, torture, and medieval-style horror. The creature was depicted using practical effects and early CGI, and the result was visually striking but thematically thin. The film performed poorly at the box office and received little critical attention, but it marked another step in the devil's evolution from regional legend to global pop culture property. By the early 2000s, the Jersey Devil had appeared in comic books, role-playing games, and video games. There was a boss fight in Castlevania, Dawn of Sorrow. Each iteration added something new: powers, weaknesses, backstories, and each moved further from the original. But perhaps the most significant cultural appropriation of the Jersey Devil came not from fiction, but from sports. In 1982, a new National Hockey League franchise was established in New Jersey, and after considering various names, the team chose the New Jersey Devils. The name was intended to evoke local identity and to signal toughness and ferocity. The team's logo, a stylized letter N with a tail and horns, was abstract enough to avoid direct offense, but clear enough in its reference. The choice was controversial. Some religious groups objected, arguing that the name glorified the demonic. Some historians and folklorists criticized it as a trivialization of a complex and culturally significant legend. But the name stuck, and in the decades since, the Jersey Devils hockey team has become one of the most successful franchises in the NHL, winning multiple Stanley Cup championships. For many people, especially younger generations, the name Jersey Devil now conjures images of hockey players and arena crowds before it conjures images of a creature in the Pine Barrens. The legend has been commodified, turned into a brand, a logo, a piece of intellectual property, and in that transformation, it has lost much of its strangeness, much of its danger. It has become safe, familiar, owned. This is the paradox of folklore in the age of mass media. The more widely a legend spreads, the more it is seen and heard and reproduced, the less power it retains. The Jersey Devil, once a symbol of everything that resisted capture, wilderness, mystery, the limits of human understanding, has been domesticated. It has been explained, illustrated, franchised, and filed away. And yet the sightings continue, not in the numbers of 1909, but steadily, quietly, year after year. People still see something in the Pine Barrens. They still hear the scream, they still find the tracks, and they still tell the stories, even if no one outside their immediate community believes them. What does the Jersey Devil mean now? It is tempting to read the legend as an environmental allegory, a symbol of the natural world's refusal to be fully colonized. The Pine Barrens have survived centuries of logging, farming. They remain the largest stretch of open space between Boston and Richmond, a million-acre wilderness in one of the most densely populated regions of the United States. And they remain, in some fundamental way, unknowable. You can hike the trails, you can study the ecosystems, you can map every stream and every stand of pitch pine, and you will still not exhaust the place. There are still parts of the forest where cell phones don't work, where GPS signals fail, where the old paths lead to nowhere. The Jersey Devil in this reading is the spirit of that resistance. It is the forest's way of saying, I am not yours. I cannot be tamed. But the legend is also about exile and monstrosity. The devil is a creature that was rejected at birth, cast out by its own mother, denied a place in the human family. It exists in permanent liminality, neither animal nor human, neither living nor dead in any conventional sense. It is cursed to wander, to haunt, to exist without belonging, and in that sense, it speaks to anyone who has ever felt cast out. Anyone who has been told they are too much, too strange, too broken to be accepted. The devil is the child no one wanted. It is the voice that cannot be understood. It is the body that cannot be contained. And it survives not by conforming, but by refusing to disappear, by making itself seen and heard, by forcing the world to acknowledge that it exists, even if the world will never accept it. There is also something in the legend about the failure of control. The farmers who armed themselves in 1909, the police officers who fired their guns, the scientists who tried to collect evidence, the FBI agents who opened files, all of them were attempting to impose order on something that defied order. And all of them failed. The devil was never caught. It was never killed. It was never even definitively proven or disproven. It occupies a space outside the mechanisms of verification and control. And that space, increasingly rare in a world of surveillance and data and explanation, is both terrifying and precious. The devil is what escapes. It is the gap in the record, the thing that does not fit, the anomaly that persists. And in a culture that demands answers, that cannot tolerate ambiguity, that insists on knowing and naming and categorizing everything, the Jersey Devil is a reminder that some things will always slip through. Some things will always remain wild. And so it endures, not in museums or in textbooks, but in the stories that people still tell late at night, in the tracks that still appear after snowfall, in the screams that echo through the pines when there is no wind. It endures because it refuses to be finished, because every attempt to explain it only makes it stranger, because the forest holds its secrets, and the devil is one of them. And because in the end, there are still places in this world where the darkness is real, where the unknown still lives, where you can stand at the edge of the trees and feel, with absolute certainty, that something is looking back. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe for more folklore, myths, and mysterious creatures. See you next time.